Corporations suck, am I right, guys? Being a corporate employee sucks. Living in a town dominated by a corporation sucks. The past sucks because of corporations. The cyberpunk genre is all about a future dominated by corporations, and it looks pretty sucky to me. And don't even get me started on the present day. Disney even made a kids movie about working in the corporate energy sector, and the bad guy turned out to be the company's own CEO. You know why? Because corporations suck. This absolute dreamboat clapped a healthcare CEO in the streets and everybody celebrated. Why? Because corporations suck. Blue haired Seattle leftists and gray haired Facebook barbers alike cheered him on as he evaded the cops because corporations suck. For a few days, nobody even knew his name or his motive. The only thing we knew about him is that he had $1 million smile and he took out a healthcare CEO, and that was enough to thrust him into folk hero status.
Nice shot.
All right, okay. No more like bad 90s stand up comedy delivery, all right? We all hate corporations, but a lot of people struggle to explain exactly how they earned all of our hatred. We just all feel it in our bones that something ain't right about corporations. We've all witnessed as corporations destroyed small towns and small businesses. Wall Street has become a synonym for an insatiable monster that puts profits over their own workers and customers. But what even is a corporation? What are the exact mechanisms they use to ruin our lives? What makes corporations so adept at making products shitty and customer service interactions inhuman and office life so excruciating? Where did corporations even come from? Have they always existed? Or are they some kind of Frankenstein's monster that we unleashed on ourselves? What's the difference between the founder or the CEO or the chairman of the board? How can one person claim to be all three at the same time? Well, I have a degree in international business, but I'm also a regular working class guy, and let me explain the history of corporations, the exact way they siphon off so much goddamn money from all of us, and I'll even offer a few ideas on how to fix this broken system. The Dutch East India Company was founded in the 1600s and is often credited as the first corporation, but that was just an extension of European imperialism, and there's actually a corporation a few hundred years older than the DEI. DEI. DEI? DEI! The actual first corporation was a group of floating mills incorporated way back in the 1400s in Toulouse, France. They originally operated as separate businesses based on the Garonne River. They would compete for ideal locations to get their boat/mills running at max capacity and argue over fishing rights and, normal business guy stuff. It was very cutthroat, and if one mill owner caught a string of bad luck and picked a spot with poor river currents or a flood damaged their boat, then they'd lose a lot of money, maybe even be forced to go out of business. And if a mill goes down, then the town can't make enough flour, and this would cause bread shortages, and if you know anything about the French, they fucking love bread, and violent protests. So in 1418, the mills joined forces under one corporate charter, the first of its kind. It was a giant manuscript that outlined the bylaws, the value of the assets, and most importantly, the division of the shares of the profits. You see, in France at the time, ownership and inheritance of assets was really complicated. The assets were often sold off to settle debts, so if 4 people owned a property and one of them owed somebody money, how do you sell off 1/4 of a property to settle the debt? So the honor the Honoré de Balzac was set up from the start to assign ownership by outlining which person owned how much of the corporation, and that was written in the charter. That way, if somebody owed money and they had to sell off a part of the company to settle that debt, it was very easy to figure out how much they owed and exactly how much that was worth. Originally, shares were rarely sold though. The shareholders would hold on to them and collect profits every so often, and that was, good enough for them. It also might be due to the fact that if a person wanted to buy a share, they had to pay a large notary fee, and they had to host a lavish banquet for all of the board members. Shareholders were also expected to pay back into the corporation periodically to help pay for upkeep, so it was more of a responsibility than, just a money-making scheme. And if they couldn't pay up, the shares reverted back to the company, and the workers got that share of the profits until it was sold off again. So from then on, it didn't matter anymore if one of the mills had a bad month and another had a good month. They all divided the total profits according to the charter, and each person involved in the new milling firm would get their specified share of the profits. And there you go. All of a sudden, all the people doing the work of milling grain got paid, and all the people of Toulouse got their bread, and the owners of the company would pay for upkeep and collect their profits. Everybody wins. If one of the mills was damaged, the shareholders would pool all their resources together and fix it, instead of allowing that individual mill to fail. It also outlined an agreement meant to outlive the people who signed it, assigning new shares to people who joined into the corporation. And this agreement remained active all the way until 1946. 1946, huh? I wonder if there was anything else going on in France around that time. Nah, I'm just kidding. It wasn't them this time. What happened was, in the 1800s, this company used the river flows to operate a hydroelectric dam, and then in 1945, France nationalized all their utilities, so this dam got kind of brought into the fold. In fact, that dam is still in business today, so technically the corporation is still operating. So the very first corporation never went out of business. It's still around. Anyway, the concepts of removing ruthless competition and pooling resources and assigning a board of directors and eliminating risk to individual shareholders were foundational to the establishment of the first incorporated firm. The root meaning of the word incorporation is to join into one body after all. And it really goes to show what type of amazing things can happen if French people run out of bread. So how did we get from this quaint story of French mill workers teaming up to ensure a steady flow of baguettes and brioche into the modern cutthroat corporate hellscape that we live under today? In the early days of America, businesses were separate entities owned by individuals, just like the French mills before they incorporated. Businesses would succeed or fail, and the individuals who owned them would succeed and fail along with them. But most of these companies were small: taverns, plantations, human trafficking rings, typical American enterprise. But in the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, these businesses became way more complex, requiring funding to acquire these fancy, newfangled, steam-powered, limb-mutilating machines coming out of England. You couldn't just get a loan from a bank to buy an enormous textile mill or set up a steel mill the way you could if you wanted to open up a tavern in town. These new machines were unproven, and they sometimes took years to get up and running and finally become profitable, so enterprising industrialists would put a funky new American spin on the corporation invented by those French losers. The original corporation wrote up a set of bylaws and assigned shares to people who actually paid for the upkeep of the operation. But these American shares went up for sale to the highest bidder, baby. They would raise startup funds by selling certificates that gave you partial ownership of the company, called a stock certificate. And the people who bought these certificates could just sit back and collect those sweet profits after the Limb Mutilator 3000 was finally up and running, without ever having to put in a single day of hard work. It was a sweet deal for wealthy landowners who were already used to buying humans and forcing them to do all the work on their plantations. So if you bought 10% of a company's stock, you were entitled to 10% of the overall profits that the company generated for as long as you owned that stock certificate. Pretty simple. You also got voting rights, so you have a say in the way the business is run, but the day-to-day decisions were made by a company employee, known as the chief executive. So the CEO is just the highest ranked employee, if you don't know that already. The periodic profit payouts were called dividends because they divided the profits up and the shareholders got it in the end. You get it? No, I'm just kidding. I just made that up. And if you didn't like the way the business was being run, you can get your rich shareholder buddies together and vote the CEO out, even if that CEO is the very person who started the business in the first place. The funny thing about this system is the only people who had access to even buy company stock were rich landowners who never worked a day in their lives because they used to own slaves, remember? So their expectations were a little unreasonable. Very quickly, America became a country with a very small group of wealthy people buying up stock in companies, collecting dividends, violently crushing worker uprisings, setting up company towns where they kept wages low and smothered entire generations under impossible levels of debt, all in the pursuit of increasing profits, and then using those profits to buy up even more company stock. Man, am I glad we left that all in the past. So by the late 1800s, the shareholder class was made up of the children and grandchildren of the original investor class. So they didn't even take the risk of investing in these companies. They just collected the sweet, sweet dividends that gushed out of trust funds set up for them by their parents, never sniffing a hard day's work in their entire life. And this was very different from the original French corporate system, where shareholders were required to reinvest to pay for upkeep or risk losing their shares to the company. What do you expect these wealthy Americans to do? Help out? But somehow things got even worse. So if you own stock in a company that spits out dividends into your trust fund every couple of months, you also own part of the company. And that chunk of the company has value, real property, equipment, brand value, intellectual property, patents. All those things have a value. So if you add all that up and a company is worth $1 million and you had a stock certificate worth 10% of that $1 million company, then boom, that certificate is worth a cool $100,000. And if in a couple of years that company grows to $2 million in value, then that certificate is now worth $200K. You can sell that. So these rich idiots realize that you don't need to sit back and collect dividends slowly over time. You can sell that stock to someone else for some quick cash, and you don't even have to host a banquet for the entire board of directors. That value is derived from all of the hard work of every employee working in that company for depressingly low wages, but the shareholders didn't have to do any of that work. It's easy money for you because you have the certificate. That's where the money's at. You didn't even buy that certificate. Your grandpa bought it for you like 50 years ago and put it in your trust fund when you were like 2 years old. Man, life can be real easy if your grandparents used to own people. So they set up a market to buy and sell all those stocks. And since they're wealthy freeloaders, completely devoid of morality, they immediately started lying and cheating and scamming each other in the stock market to get the most possible money out of that certificate and screw the other guy. Another funny thing happened though. All the lies would eventually catch up to them and the stock market would crash from time to time. Lots of crashes happened for various reasons. But in every case, the shareholder class would lie about the value of their certificates, then something would happen that would get a couple people to realize, holy shit, this stock certificate that I thought was worth 200K is actually worth like half that. I better sell it before anybody else finds out. And then hilarity would ensue. So other people would see these stocks getting sold off and they would get spooked by all this selling. And so they would start selling their stocks too to try to, not lose money. And then a sell-off would take place, crashing the values of nearly every stock, even the ones that aren't even overvalued, because nobody knows what's real and what's fake. This is literally what causes every market crash. All these sweaty losers trading stocks would suddenly realize that the things they're buying and selling aren't worth nearly as much as everyone says it's worth, and then $1 trillion of wealth evaporates overnight. But the way things worked out, the working class people who built all the real actual value that they're trading would be the ones who suffered for it. So the act of trying to make money by purchasing stock, hoping that the price will go up to sell it later for a higher price to make a lot of quick cash, is called speculation. And the shareholder class doesn't just speculate over stocks. They do it to energy, raw materials, housing, Pokemon cards, crypto, sneakers, everything. Everything is just like a quick money-making scheme. And the thing about this speculative investing is it's fucking dumb. Speculators fucking suck. I hate them because they make everything unstable and more expensive than they need to be, and they add no value to whatever it is they're trading, and they cause economic collapses every single time. So imagine the housing market. There are the people who build and sell houses and the people who buy and live in houses. If 3 houses go for sale and 3 families want to buy them, and they all agree on a price, then everyone's happy, everything's stable. But if there's some loser using his mommy and daddy's money to buy 2 of the houses to try to flip them for a profit later on, now 3 families are fighting over that one remaining house. So they bid each other up, driving up home prices, which gives the rich guy justification to sell the other 2 houses for more money than it's actually worth. Most likely to those other 2 families trying to buy a house and live in it in the first place. So if speculators keep doing this, driving up home prices to the point where nobody can afford them, then the market reaches a breaking point and the people who need to buy and live in a house can't afford it. So the speculators get spooked and they start selling off their houses and lowering the price, trying to recoup their investment. And this causes other speculators to freak out and dump their houses. which causes a crash. And now the people who actually live in their house are left paying for a house that's worth less than the mortgage they're paying because they got the mortgage when the house's value was massively inflated. Just look up the Dutch tulip bubble and learn about how the 17th century version of an NFT bro would buy up contracts for tulips with the hope of selling it later for more money. And as more of these flower bros bought up more tulip contracts, and yes, I'm talking about the flower, the price would go up simply because more buyers are entering the market. Then there came a time where the normal tulip consumer can't even afford to buy a tulip because all these tulip bros had all of the tulips, even though they didn't even want the tulips, they just wanted the money. So then the tulip trade collapsed. The growers and sellers of tulips would go out of business, and the rich guys who ruined the entire trade would be, slightly less rich. And they immediately start looking for the next speculative scam that they can get in on. The same thing happened with the stock market during the Great Depression and a few dozen times before and after the Great Depression. The housing crash of the 80s, Black Tuesday, the dot-com bubble of the early 2000s, the housing market crash in 2008, fossil fuel industry trade pretty much consistently since the invasion of Iraq, sneakers, Beanie Babies, the tech sector. It's the same problem over and over again. Trust fund kids who never worked a day in their life using their mommy and daddy's millions to try to turn it into billions. And they create a price bubble that pops and ruins the economy for everybody. So remember how I said that a company and all its properties and patents and revenues and intellectual property and brand value are used to figure out the actual value of the company's stock certificate that you hold in your hand? Well, another funny thing happened along the way. When a crash happens and people sell off all their overvalued stock, it would always get out of hand, and the stock values would often crash lower than the real intrinsic value of the company. If a company is actually valued at $100,000, but the stock is overvalued at $200,000 because shareholders are dumbasses and liars, the eventual crash and sell-off could result in the stock being valued at $20,000 when all the dust settles, but the property still exists. The machinery, the patents, the intellectual property, the brand value, these are all real things that exist. It's all still intrinsically worth $100,000, but in the eyes of the shareholder leech class, it's worth a lot less than that because they can't make easy money off of it anymore. So to recoup their losses, they fire employees, sell off equipment and patents, file for bankruptcy, and stop paying pensions, and all these worthless rich people cause the overall economy to collapse further while they stuff their pockets with cash. Fired employees can't pay their mortgage or afford necessities, so other businesses would fail, and the stock market crash would destroy the broader economy. So there comes a point where the shareholder class decided that the share price of the stock started dictating the overall value of the company, not the other way around. And this gave the shareholder class the opportunity to create value out of thin air, boosting up the stock value without even establishing a real company that creates products or provides services at all. It's just like a ghost company built on pure hype, and the CEO just builds this hype by promising more and more and failing to come through on these promises, and then hopefully at some point people get fed up and the company collapses. But a lot of companies have been doing this for years or even decades and continuously get away with it. So the demand to buy up stocks to quickly sell it for a higher value in the near future has turned the stock market and other investment schemes into the Dutch tulip situation. And the overinflated value of stocks is usually the tipping point that plunges the rest of the economy into a recession. And all these bubble and crash cycles always leave the working class to feel all the pain from these shitbags speculators' poor choices. The wealthiest 10% of Americans hold 93% of all stocks, while the poorest 50% only hold 1%. That means nearly every working American you know, every retirement fund, every 401k and Roth IRA, every retail level Wall Street bro is represented right here. Together, we only hold 7% of the wealth that we actually 100% created, and the other 93% of the wealth is held by idiot losers born with trust funds. Some of these trust fund weirdos are chuggy influencers gentrifying Brooklyn, and others are rural cosplayers who can't wear a cowboy hat properly and gentrifying Montana. They're found everywhere. We fought an entire revolution to get away from these lazy, landed gentry types of people just to recreate the same system again right here. And corporations made that possible. This corporate shareholder wealth is a tax that you pay. In the old days, we paid taxes to the crown. and they spent it all on a lavish lifestyle while peasants did all the work. And we're living in that same system all over again. Working class people are engineers, lawyers, teachers, fast food workers, actors, tradespeople, pro athletes, business owners, and even CEOs. Please don't close the video. Hear me out. The CEO is a job, it's a real job. It's a job that's been perverted by the shareholder class, but we can take that job back. We can kick out the overpaid trust fund losers cosplaying as workers who make up much of the corporate CEOs, and we can promote one of the actual workers who really run the company behind the scenes into that role. Everybody who's ever worked for a corporation knows that there comes a point high up in the power structure that's exclusively made up of Nepo hires who don't know what the fuck is going on.
Could you do it a little bit faster?
Faster?
A little bit.
No, I can do it faster. This is a lot harder than you think.
2, 3 cheeseburgers.
Okay, as soon as I find it. Cheese on those?
They come with cheese. They're double cheeseburger combo.
Oh.
You get 2 minutes.
Okay, it was a
Subway Club.
Subway Club.
American
Club.
Swiss, extra cheese.
Excuse me. Here to go. This trouble here. Sure. What kind of cheese would you like, sir?
American Swiss.
10 seconds.
Okay, and
Once upon a time, some corporations would compete to retain employees, offer robust compensation, and focus on long-term stable growth. And as a company grew, their workforce would prosper, and shareholders often came last. But then Jack Welch hit the scene. This man is the reason corporations started to push for massive layoffs and send jobs overseas and conduct stock buybacks, all in the name of short-term profits. Prior to the 80s, high corporate and income tax rates motivated corporations to reinvest into their companies and employees and spend all that money before it was taxed. And employees and the broader economy flourished because of it. But in 1981, Jack Welch became CEO of General Electric just as Ronald Reagan took office, and they were the tag team champions of screwing the American worker. GE had 400,000 employees when he took over, but laid off 72,000 people and shut down 12 entire factories in his first 2 years. He pioneered a policy called the Vitality Curve, where managers would rank their employees and the bottom 10% would get fired. And they would do that every year. This is basically used by every big corporation now. How did they rank people? Who knows? Maybe if you're about to retire and start pulling a pension, or if you got sick or injured on the job, or you took your family on vacation, you were put at the bottom of the list. It's hard to say. He replaced loyal workers with temporary contractors. He crushed unions. He sent as many American jobs overseas as he can get away with. And Reagan stood by and helped him destroy worker protections and lower corporate tax rates and reduce regulations to make Welch's job easier. Welch lobbied Reagan to cut regulations on mergers and stock buybacks, which has been catastrophic for workers. What's a stock buyback? Let's talk about it. Prior to Reagan and going back to the Great Depression when it was originally outlawed, stock buybacks were viewed as a form of market manipulation, which it is. It's a scheme where corporations buy back stock, which reduces the overall supply of the stock available on the market, artificially boosting the value of any remaining stock outstanding. And much of that stock is held by rich people and corporate executives. So these corporate execs and hedge funds see a quick boost in their profits, while the people who actually work for the company and create the real actual value of the company are being fired. They literally make more money by destroying jobs. Anybody who calls these people job creators are pathetic bootlickers. And if you ask yourself, if GE is launching a stock buyback and every investor knows that the stock is about to be worth a whole lot more, why would anybody sell their shares to GE? Who would even sell that stock? You are. You are the one selling the shares. If you own a 401k, you aren't managing the stock transactions yourself. Some half-wit banker is. So when a stock buyback is launched, the person who has access to your retirement fund sells it, and you lose money. What, you think these bankers are going to sell the shares held in hedge funds or trust funds? Of course not. This corporate system isn't designed to serve you. It's designed to serve them. So what happened to Welch? Well, all his stock buybacks and downsizing and mergers and acquisitions that garnered praise from the corporate media turned out to be a giant shell game. He hit a lot of losses and inflated his earnings to the point where GE was fined $50 million. Welch didn't go to jail though. And after this, pretty much every corporation in the US followed Jack Welch's template. And then the IRS was kneecapped to make it easier for corporations to get away with it. And we just hired a bunch of IRS agents to help sort through all this corporate financial fuckery and try to get the wealthiest Americans and corporations to pay us over $1 trillion in unpaid taxes. Did you know that? Did you know there's over $1 trillion of unpaid taxes out there owed to us by wealthy billionaire freeloaders? And we hired a bunch of IRS agents to go over the records and try to recoup that money. But then the shittiest freeloaders of them all got elected and the IRS agents got fired. And a bunch of idiots who get a W-2 and fill out a 1099 form every year cheered it on for some reason. Why do working class people hate the IRS? If you collect a paycheck every 2 weeks, the IRS can't touch you. What are you afraid of? These billionaires are literally stealing from you, and a bunch of pathetic losers are cheering this on. Like, I get it. If you own a small business or you're like self-employed or a freelancer, yeah, paying taxes and dealing with the IRS can be annoying. But these IRS agents weren't hired to go after you. They were specifically hired to go after billionaires who owe us $1 trillion, maybe even more. We don't know after they go through all that paperwork, or if they had the chance to go through all that paperwork, we could have found $1 trillion more that they owed us and earned another $1 trillion in fines. But no, this sentient hemorrhoid fired them all. So how did Jack Welch even get away with it? A person who starts a private business is liable for anything the company does. If the company commits crimes, then the owner can face criminal charges. If the private company gets sued, the owner of the company is liable and everything they own is fair game when it comes time to pay fines or restitution. Their home, their personal bank accounts, assets, everything they own can be factored into the fines and restitutions that they might be liable for. But a corporation stands as its own person, and only a corporation's assets are at risk if they break the law. The CEO, the shareholders, the board members, they don't face any criminal penalties for the crimes that they commit, and their personal wealth isn't at risk when it's time to pay fines. You can't put a corporation in prison, and if the crime nets more income than the fines, then there's nothing stopping them from doing crimes. Poisoning children, killing workers, bribing politicians, laundering money for criminal organizations. Pay this small fee, and a corporation is free to do it all. So this is how it works. A rich kid starts a company using their mommy and daddy's money. People working for these companies do all the work and create all the innovations and value that enrich the business owner, and they use their connections to get ahead of small businesses owned by working class people. The business owner decides, I want to go public. I want to be a corporation. So then the founder of that business usually makes themselves the CEO and chairman of the board so they can do anything they want without fear of being replaced by the shareholders. Hedge funds set up to serve the wealthy buy up most of the stocks, and as long as profit is pouring out of the company, then the shareholders are happy anyways. But if they're unhappy, they can try to get rid of the CEO, but they would have to do that through the board. And if the founder and the CEO is also the chairman of the board, there's nothing stopping them. The CEO and other executives are themselves shareholders too. So on top of their insanely high compensation packages, they also collect dividends. Working class people can take part in the system through their 401k or by buying up stock at the retail level, but we make up a tiny percent of the overall system. So the system is not designed to work in our favor. CEOs work for and only for the shareholder. As long as the shareholders are happy, they keep their job. So they do anything and everything to keep the stock price high and profits pouring out. You can either build hype to keep the share price higher than the real value of the company, or you can turn the screws on your employees and jack up prices on your customers to keep profits high. Or you can do both. You can even break the law in the pursuit of higher share values and profits because corporate executives are protected from most criminal penalties as long as their law breaking is done to keep the profits coming in. If they commit crimes as part of their job as CEO, then the company pays the fine, and the CEO serves no time in prison. This is by design, and if the profits that come out of the crime are higher than the fines they have to pay, then there's literally no downside. If the CEO commits fraud against the shareholders, though, then they go to jail. You can't steal from rich people. That's not allowed in America. And in recent years, the lawmakers that are supposed to keep these people in check are shareholders themselves. Look at all these Congress people who hold massive amounts of shares. Why are they allowed to do this at all? If you're in Congress and you're making the laws, you shouldn't be able to own shares at all. But who's going to tell them to do it? Other Congress people who also own shares? No. They write the laws. Why would they outlaw a system that benefits them financially? They're not going to do it. So this pressure to drive up share prices leads shareholders to drive stock values artificially high, creating a bubble because they'll lie about the value of these shares. Because if they don't lie, then they'll lose their job. So, they're going to lie. So all these overvalued companies create different bubbles in different parts of the economy. And then these bubbles eventually collapse and the working class people endure the broken economy. And we watch as our retirements evaporate. Since the shareholder class is tied in with the government, the corporations get bailed out while we are left to fend for ourselves. And the shareholder class uses that cash as an opportunity to buy up even more shares and more property, and the process starts all over again. Oh, hey, look, what's that? So how do we fix this? Another revolution? Are we bringing back guillotines? It won't require guillotines. It's actually way easier than that, and it requires zero violence. We can just rearrange the system a little bit to make sure the stocks, dividends, and the value that the working class people actually generate can keep it for ourselves. And this landed gentry shareholder class that collect taxes off our labor will just need to get a real job. It's not too late, Warren Buffett. You can roll up those sleeves and pull up those bootstraps and get to work like the rest of us. You can actually make a lot of money if you get into a plumber's apprenticeship or get into like the elevator repair union. One thing you can do right now is learn to recognize the type of politicians who are trying to help the corporate class screw us over. If politicians promise to help job creators, just know that they're really helping the people trying to destroy your job in the name of profits. If they're telling you they want to cut taxes and regulation and unleash the private sector, know that they're really trying to help corporations take everything you own and raise your cost of living in the process. That is the language of someone who works for corporations. And if they work for corporations, then they don't work for you. Jack Welch would not have been as destructive if Reagan wasn't helping him. So what else can we do? You'll have to check in for part 2, where I lay out my plan to get rid of speculators and take the shares back and put them in the hands of the workers who actually make those shares valuable in the first place. Part 2 coming out soon. Thanks.